Well, hello there. My name is Carrie Varela, and it's always a pleasure to be joined here with Michaela Daystar. And this is the fourth video of our series on being true to your way and developing a conversation around integrity for Reiki practitioners. And today, in our topic, we're going to be discussing economic integrity and how it is that we go about having integrity. And I'm going to introduce maybe a new word for integrity today, the word being right relationship. So, how do we cultivate a right relationship around money within the practice in the context of practicing teaching Reiki as Reiki practitioners? And so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the issue, Michaela.
Yeah, Carrie, it feels good to be at this kind of level in our conversation. We've been having this conversation for a while and touching on, what integrity means for ourselves, between ourselves and others, and between ourselves and culture. And this piece around economics, around money, really threads through all of them. And it really becomes a place where our values and kind of how we've chosen and wrestled with being in integrity with all of those other pieces is very clearly expressed kind of in an external way in terms of how we navigate money. Because for those of us who choose to practice Reiki as our business, as our job, as our, either partial or primary source of income, um, money really is the external part of the external expression of our values. A mentor of mine, who's a politician here in the state of California, always says that budgets or finances are expressions of values. And I really believe that the way that we show up in our economics, whether it's in our family, in our small businesses, or in the state, or on out, truly does externally express our internal values. And so it's a really important place to be in this conversation. And so the way that I've, held my relationship and wrestled with being in right relationship with money in my business, really threads through all of these other topics. And, before touching on those, I just want to reiterate that, in this series of conversations that we're sharing publicly, Carrie and I are primarily talking about our own journey and our own choices, our own thought processes and decisions around these topics. We're not trying to tell anybody else what to do, how to be in integrity inside of your business. What we really want to do is pose the questions that we have wrestled with, that we feel are important from the perspective of Reiki practitioners, teachers, and business owners who've been in this for a very long time. And just to open up that conversation, each of you gets to make your own decisions about what integrity looks like inside of your own Reiki practice. And we just would love to be in conversation with you about that. So that being said, we can look at the experience of money and money as an expression of values with relationship to our own selves in our Reiki practice, which for me really looks at, am I in integrity with my family and my own financial needs, right? We've talked before, and I think we actually had a conversation about this on the Reiki Women podcast that we get to do with Bronwyn, that oftentimes there is an impulse that, helping professionals like us, people who get into this sort of business to help other people, particularly also women, that we tend to undervalue our work, that we tend to put our own financial needs below our need to help, our desire to help, our desire to make our services accessible. And in the balancing act between being in integrity with others, making services accessible to them, and being in financial integrity with ourselves and our own needs, that we tend, and this has definitely been true for me, to put our own needs lower priority. And so, I wanted to start there because I, have a history of undervaluing my work and therefore being out of integrity with myself and my family. And I think it's important to start there and to just name that dynamic. Because part, I think, of what was certainly true for me, and I think could be true for other people, is that undercharging for my work was part of how I attempted to be in integrity with these other pieces, with making my work accessible to other people, with wrestling with the challenges around, working in a healing art that is from a culture that's different from my own, navigating some of the uncomfortable feelings around that. And I, early on in my work, um, I would say made the mistake or tried to address those feelings and tried to address my desire for my work to be accessible to others by undervaluing myself. And that is not in good integrity with my own needs, and with valuing the services that are being provided, respecting the services that are being provided. And it's not a thorough, sustainable, fully formed strategy for working through accessibility, working through questions about culture and cultural appropriation. It's like that is not the way to get at those other things. And so I just really wanted to start there, and say that that has been a major journey for me. Something that I've had, business coaches confront me about, like the journey of raising prices to a level of sustainability for my family, like, is ongoing. Like, it's not even where it needs to be yet, but it has felt good to name publicly for my community and for my client base, um, that I am going to choose to make adjustments to my pricing to be in better integrity with myself and with my own needs, and better integrity with the value of the services that I was providing. Um, and then from there, right, once we have that baseline of financial integrity for ourselves, then we really do need to look at what does it mean to be integrity with other people as far as finances go. How do we make our services accessible to the range of people that feels right for us to make it accessible to? How do we, or do we choose to have some sort of flexibility in our pricing, some way of charging, more for people who can pay it so that those who can't, have a buffer? How do we hold those pieces? And so I think I'll just pause on that question, because I'd love to hear, a little bit about your journey and how you hold integrity around finances for yourself and for others.
Yeah, I think that's such an important topic, and I appreciate all of the thoughts that you have to share. They really do mirror my own experiences with it. And, having it financial integrity for me as a solo entrepreneur, I don't even like that word, but a solo practitioner, um, has always been it's really a challenge. And I mirror what you said about the challenge it is for women to really value our time, to value our services and put a value on that. It's something very uncomfortable about that. Um, in my own journey, I've always been, or well, for the last 15 years, as both a Reiki practitioner and a yoga teacher, I've been in basically two industries where, um, in yoga, I can't really set the value of what I offer, but I can say that the value that I bring to every yoga class is usually underpaid. Like, I'm underpaid almost constantly. All yoga teachers are underpaid when you really look at everything that goes into teaching a public yoga class. Most yoga teachers are definitely underpaid. Um, but within Reiki, what has been really interesting for me is that I get to set my own rates. So I get to really determine, and evaluate and look at what the right rate is for me. And for myself, that like really comes down to a lot of complicated spreadsheets. I'm a spreadsheet kind of person, and I've had the opportunity to study, or to learn from different business coaches and adapt several different spreadsheets that are super useful for me in my business. Um, because it gives me the sense, and what I appreciate about this conversation is that money ultimately gives us a sense of perspective, and it's not the only perspective, but it's one that I do think we need to be in more integrity with, because not only as an integrity for ourselves as Reiki practitioners, but also for each other. So as I can say from a yoga teaching perspective, there's a lot of times where yoga has been given away for free, or people just do a Reiki or yoga teacher training and they want to gain experience, so they start teaching for free. Same within Reiki, you do a Reiki training, you want to offer those services for free, and I don't have any problem with that. It's just when there should be a period where you can offer those services for free, but after a certain point, you really do, I think, to have integrity for yourself and for your other practitioners, to start charging a fee, a reasonable fee. And what's reasonable is totally different based on where you live, the community that you're a part of, whether or not there's other practitioners doing similar things as you. So all of that is really, personal dynamic. So it's hard to say, oh, this is what you should charge for Reiki, or this is what you should charge for anything else that you do. But for me, if I'm even going to put a dollar sign on things for me, I think for me, what I've discovered after my inquiry around this is that a minimum about $65 per session, or whatever your monetary equivalent is, that's when it really starts to make financial sense to do what you're doing. And to put it in perspective, there's this, our time is not free. Our time is not free on this planet. We have a limited number of days, a limited number of times, we have a limited number of breaths. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to do things for free, or do things with a heart of service for others. And I certainly do a lot of things for free in my business, including having this conversation with you today, Michaela. So I think the question is how do we create a greater culture of care around people who support us on our healing path, whether they be Reiki practitioners or yoga teachers or other people. Are we supporting them well? The challenge is that, of course, Reiki isn't part of a traditional medical model. So, a lot of people, there is a struggle there, because a lot of people who really need help, oftentimes they're also struggling financially. And so that painful dynamic is almost always there. So I really do appreciate that it's important to value your services in such a way that they're accessible, potentially offering services for free or at a sliding scale if appropriate for you. But I always turn to, there's this like dynamic within economics where there's like three circles. So the first circle is on top, and it's like a circle or a range around what the value is of whatever product you're offering. And that's pretty straightforward. And it can be a range. It can be, I know some people who charge $200 for or more for a healing session. So there's always going to be a range. And then another circle on, to the left of that is a circle of like what the range is for you or me. So if you live in New York City and you're in, a non-rent controlled apartment, your services might need to be valued much more like in the range of $125 or $150 for you to make your rent and be able to, buy food and, get your expenses covered that way. So, and then there's this other circle around what somebody is willing to pay. And again, that might be very different based on where you live, your geography, and so forth. But when those three circles interlap, that's kind of the sweet spot. That's really where we start to look at a little bit more closely about, what's in right relationship. And so for me, I think some of the things that go into the dynamic around what is the appropriate price to charge, it really starts with what your overhead is. Like, so if you have, if you're renting space, I charge for my sessions a 3-session package. And if as long as I at least sell one of those in a month, then my rent and most of my overhead is covered. And so that's really important to just get your like that's the most baseline, right? You don't want to be going under every month around just having a space, a healing space to utilize in your practice. But all the other subtle things to consider when formulating your own rate is also how much time you put into it. And a general factor is, to cut your rate in half, because you probably spend twice the amount of time that you have with your client as you do outside of your client to help, create the space for their healing. So whether that be doing a Reiki meditation for yourself, so you can feel really grounded and centered and ready to receive whatever it is that they're working on. It might also include, transportation time to get to your office and back. Might also include times like setup time and the space that you can have between sessions. And so all of those things I think are really important to consider when you're crafting your rate. And I'm saying all this because I actually have a whole package of spreadsheets that I'm putting together as a training for Reiki practitioners that you can utilize. And so I'll put a link in the show notes to that little, tool that you can access and use. And yeah, so I think it's just really important to use that word right relationship, because I think sometimes money does definitely bring up this kind of yuck factor. There's a lot of implicit biases that we might have about money and our own relationship around money. And so having a solo practitioner business will absolutely put you in the fire in order to charge and feel really good about charging the appropriate rate for your time and your services.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a wonderful thing that you have an affinity with spreadsheets, because I do not. And so it's a great service that you are providing by sharing those tools, because, math and spreadsheets not always super compatible with the kind of work that we do. So I really appreciate that about you. Um, yeah, and I love the framing that you bring of right relationship. And I loved the quote that you read earlier when we were in conversation, and I'd love to invite you to share it now, from Hyakuten Inamoto, around that the specific thing that really stood out to me was how do we apply the money that we receive? So I'd love to just ask you to share that quote, and then I wanted to respond to it.
Yeah, so Hyakuten Inamoto, he has this really nice interview with Pamela Miles. And so we can put that link to the interview in the show notes, because I think it's really worthwhile to investigate not only, our conversation about money from our perspective and from our culture, but also from Japanese culture. But his perspective is money is beyond good or bad. It's neutral. The question is how we use it. It's okay to make a lot of money. But if we only use money, not just, or if we only use money for not just our own interests, but for the good of people, for sharing, then money becomes good money. But if we use money for only our own interests, then money can not be good. His personal view is that it's okay to make money and we don't have to feel guilty about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a place where, really working with our practice of the system of Reiki, particularly when we're working with it from its Japanese origins, which has a strong Buddhist origin, can be really beneficial. Because when I think about being in right relationship, and when I think about, money being neutral, and it's about what our relationship is with it that matters. I think about the concepts of attachment and non-attachment, which is something that I work with a lot with myself and with my students and clients. And that when we feel attached to the things that we have, or the identities that we carry, or desires that we have for the future, or we're attached to fears or resentments that we have about the past, this is when suffering for ourselves and radiating out from us occurs. And so when we think about attachments to money, there's a lot that can come up there. And so when I started raising my prices, as I mentioned earlier, I realized that I had an attachment to the view of myself as generous, and that I was defining generous as I don't charge much money. So I had to release that view, because that wasn't being generous to myself, and it wasn't, again, being respectful to the services I was providing. So, letting go of that attachment. And then, you know, letting go of attachment to the resources itself, right? Because when we've cultivated a kind of a scarcity mindset around money, which, goes hand in hand with not earning enough of it. But it also can go hand in hand with having plenty of money, but being afraid of losing it, or, there's a kind of a clinging on to money that can happen if we're not in right relationship with it. And so I noticed a bit of that, like when I started, earning more because of not only raising my prices, but, learning to be more savvy as a business owner, and more well known as a, provider of these services, that there was a sense of attachment to that resource. And when we're in that place of clinging on and gripping and being attached to that resource, rather than relating to it as a flow, right? That it flows in and it flows out, and we want to have, make good, responsible choices about the way in which it flows out, where it flows. But if we're gripping onto it and feeling like, I better hold on to this, or I better spend it only on X, Y, and Z, um, then we're in that place of attachment, in that place where we can cause suffering for ourselves and others. And in that space, generosity and gratitude can't really flourish and be cultivated. Um, on the other hand, cultivating gratitude for those resources that come in and leaning into the natural generosity that comes from gratitude, um, is an antidote to that. And so that was something that I put into play, um, very intentionally, right? And working with the precepts around releasing attachment to fear about resources, releasing attachment to anger about, you know, feeling unresourced in the past, and then really leaning into gratitude and compassion. And so that neutrality of money then gets to shift into positivity because of the choices that we're making with the resource. And for me, that really, really feels like integrity. And in that space of enough, there's enough coming in, there's an enoughness that we get to experience. And then focusing on generosity and gratitude, we can make some creative choices about how we come into integrity with other people with regard to money. And so some of the ways that has shown up for me, I realized I had a lot of attachment to money around this time of year when it's, holiday season. There's, a lot of competition for where our money gets spent during this season, right? And there's a lot of pressure on us, particularly as parents and as, folks who are responsible for households, to spend a lot of money around holidays, around feasting, around hosting people. And I realized at a certain point that I was really, I had a lot of anxiety about this time and with relation to money. And so about 7 years ago, I decided to just really lean into gratitude and generosity, and started a tradition of offering 22 gift sessions to whoever wanted them during this time. And it was kind of a leap of faith that there will be enough coming in to sustain that level of generosity during a time when there's a lot of pressure on my money. And it's, I mean, it was very successful because I keep doing it, right? And what I've noticed is that holding that balance of, honoring my own needs, being in integrity for my own needs. So I charge what I need to, and I devote attention that I need to my business, so that it can flourish, causes the sensation of enough, which then, when I'm conscious of it and when I make the choice, right? Because we can always hoard, we can always grip and attach to those resources. But when I consciously choose to let it flow and open up this generous space, um, it's just completely changed my relationship with money and with this time. I could say a lot more about that, but I think that's just a good place to leave it there. And then, really spending a lot of time developing what feels right to me as far as accessibility of my services for others. And so, and for me, what integrity looks like there is, rather than my original strategy, which was to just basically offer a sliding scale to anybody at all times with no limit, which opened myself up for being chronically underpaid. Um, I've put some container around that. I've put some limits around it. And so for all of my offerings, I state really clearly what the value is, like what the cost is. And I've, as I said before, allowed that number to go up over the years and to go a little bit above the kind of industry standard for my area, because I really had to acknowledge finally that that industry standard is low, that the other practitioners in my area, for whatever reason, maybe some of these same mindsets that we're talking about, have been keeping their prices quite low for a very long time. And I finally decided, okay, I'm going to be the one to to raise the bar a little bit. Um, but having done that, stating clearly this is the cost, I set a certain number of sliding scale tickets that are available for any given service. The numbers of them are limited. And I clearly state, I allow people to self-select. I don't require people to like prove hardship or anything like that. But I clearly state, select these price tickets if these conditions are true for you, essentially if finances would be a barrier to your participation. And then those tickets are limited at a number that is the right number for what I can sustain. And so that felt like the right strategy for me as far as being in integrity with other people around accessibility to my services. I can put down in the now that is a collection of resources that will be in the notes, just a little example of the wording that I settled with, because I'm really happy with the way that I kind of worked out how to describe what that sliding scale looks like.
You're a maestro of words, Michaela. You've got a great way of expressing yourself
I
that
appreciate
way.
that. Yeah, so that is what feels right to me as far as balancing integrity, financial integrity for myself and for others. And then the other piece that we've talked about as far as right relationship, as far as integrity, is how to balance integrity around culture. And so I would, invite people to revisit the conversation that we posted previously around integrity with culture. We talk about topics like spiritual bypassing, like cultural appropriation, and really, talk about the way in which both of us have wrestled with the question of what does it mean to be a white American practicing a Japanese art, and how we came into a place of feeling an integrity with that, and what actions we decided we needed to take in our practices to make that so. Um, and so, yeah, so I'd love, Carrie, to just pitch it back to you to just share some of the pieces from that conversation and how you feel cultural appropriation and integrity with culture relates to money.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to start there because, I think it is really important. So I think let's to give an example, right, is potentially, our actions might be appropriative if let's say if we wrote a book about a specific Japanese temple that, had some relationship to Reiki, and, the whole book was kind of premised around this temple, and yet all of the proceeds of that book go to the author, who is maybe in this example, let's say it's a white European or white American person, and then there's no revenue stream going back to that temple, even though the whole premise of the book is sharing the cultural and spiritual resources or richness of that temple. So I think to me that's a very clear example of appropriation. Um, but so, being in right relationship is remembering the source of our inspiration and seeing if there's ways in which we can build um, a sense of giving back, or like you were saying, a flow of money, of resources, of exchange that feels really nourishing for everybody involved. Um, so, there's some backlash within the yoga communities about how these like white Americans, that, the yoga industry is like 5 billion, I don't know, people spend like 5 billion on yoga every year, yet these the cultural source from where all of this came from is still languishing in poverty.
Mm.
um, I don't know, there's a lot to explore within that, so I kind of leave that to our own inquiry into what feels right for us. So I think just remembering where we receive these things, and if you've done a training, I think it starts there. So paying your teacher appropriately for their time, and especially as it relates to Reiki trainings, we haven't really mentioned this, but Reiki training can be anywhere from I think I need 8 hours to really dive into a Reiki level 1 training, sometimes 16 hours. And so when we're charging something like $125, I don't think that that's appropriate for the amount of time that the instructor gives, but it also doesn't show a right relationship to the practice. Because we are already from the outset somewhat we are undervaluing what is priceless, what is has an immense spiritual richness and relevance to helping us live our life better. And so when we have a high vibe around what we're charging and really seeing the worth of it, and again, having that match what people are willing to pay to receive that initiation to Reiki, I think, that's all kind of a give and take, but we should be valuing it appropriately. And of course, giving opportunities for scholarships and such when people really want to study it, but might not have that funds there. And I think also what you were speaking to, Michaela, is kind of sowing seeds of good karma, and when you give 22 Reiki sessions, hopefully it's done with this lack of attachment around, well, someday you're going to pay me back for that time. We have to give just generously without that connection to attachment. But that sometimes is the way it is. So when we really see people and we offer some immense value to them, whether it be in a free offering or in a low cost offering that is sustainable for us, that does sow those seeds of good karma, where somebody is just wanting to kind of pay you back for what you've given to them. And those are things that I think sustain us as practitioners in high and low times of recession and times of abundance. I think it's important to remember that we probably all, and I certainly know that I have had a lot of struggles around getting fixated about a specific number, like wanting to earn this amount every year and being disappointed or feeling like I'm not successful enough when I don't earn that money, or don't earn that certain amount. And so to me, it's also about being right relationship with my own perception of what is success or failure. And I have to do that all the time as a solo entrepreneur. Sometimes my idea of success is like, I should have 10 people in every Reiki training. And honestly, that's just not sustainable. And what is success, I think, in a Reiki training is when we can give Reiki to even just one person and have the message of Reiki, the spirit of Reiki really come purely through us, and bless that person with the knowledge and experience of Reiki. I think that is the foundation of success. But we also have to look at it a little pragmatically of, again, what is sustainable for us and our family. But not getting too fixated on a number as success, and remembering that a lot of times the good that we do, we can't really see end result of it. So being detached from that end result, and knowing that money and abundance flows. Also think it's important to be mindful that more than likely we need more than what we're asking for. And there's an excellent resource out there called 7 Streams of Money. And it talks about if you are a solo practitioner, whether you're in real estate, whether you're in our industry, whether you're a yoga teacher, that we really need 7 streams of income to becoming and nourishing our own little river of money. And by doing that, that is one characteristic of sustainability, of longevity. So I know for me, teaching yoga and offering Reiki, those two things, those 2 streams were really powerful for me because it gave me an opportunity to be in front of people, to work with people, new people all the time, as a yoga teacher, and then inviting people into my practice if they felt called to do that. That was always a source of new clients for me, and really impactful in terms of how I was able to sustain my Reiki practice for the last 15 years. So
Yeah.
those 2 streams were really fundamental, and then building other streams that contributed and brought in resources, and new clients into my business. So those are all things to consider. And I think it's important as Reiki practitioners to remember we don't have to be completely outside of the system as solo practitioners. We're not really supported by, we don't have a IRA retirement account, etc. And so it's wonderful to build up maybe a resource or an aspect of you professionally that does give you those resources, and living that concurrent life. And that there's, hopefully that there might be some mixed feelings about that, but not feeling that we're not a success, or not feeling that we're not worthy, or good at what we do because we're not able to do it and sustain ourselves 100% professionally. That is really challenging to do, and it's such a high bar. It's honestly such a high bar that if we put that as our level of success, then we're failing ourselves. We're failing, our mindset is failing us. And so being more open, I think, has always been one thing that I really tried to maintain, being more open to how money comes into my life and not being attached to having it just coming from my Reiki practice or business, has helped me feel more abundant and resourced. And then finally, it also comes back to time, and remembering that our time has so much value. And if you're enjoying what you do, then that's okay too. And it's okay to make less because you're really enjoying your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the piece about like diversifying the way in which money flows, right? The 7 streams is a really great image. And I have found that to be so important in my, journey with financial integrity with myself, is really allowing myself to open up those new streams, and so for me that's included renting space in my home, sharing my home with another family, which has brought many blessings to my life that I wasn't expecting, when I just kind of made this financial decision. It's looked like, monetizing certain aspects of my gardening practice, right? I now host a seedling sale in the spring that has nothing to do with Reiki, but it has everything to do with being an active, valuable participant in my community, which, has grown visibility for my business, but it's also allowed me to, spend a good amount of time on something that's important to my self-care, my spiritual practice, and my just lifestyle, which is gardening, and allow that to, essentially pay for that corner of my life. And then just really allowing myself to follow kind of creative impulses and endeavors, and partnerships with other people, being open to those, part-time or temporary jobs with other, in other realms, or with organizations that, want to bring in my services. And we have to balance not spreading ourselves too thin with that, right? Because that certainly is a thing that happens, right? I've neglected certain points of my primary business because I'm kind of on these side quests. But, the last couple of years, I've really been able to find this point of balance as far as time and money, and paying more attention to, is this endeavor really contributing? And letting go of those that don't. So I think that that's a really lovely place for us to land on, and to offer up to those who are listening, that experience of being creative, being open to many different streams to fill that river that sustains you and that connects you to your community, that allows you to do the work that you love and that is meaningful in the world, and to be in good integrity with your own financial needs and with your family. And so I think that's a great place for us to rest.
Absolutely. So if you find that you've benefited from this conversation, please do those wonderful good karma of sending it out to other people that you think would benefit. Please feel free to like, comment, or share. Also, commenting and sharing with us your own journey around financial integrity as a Reiki practitioner. We all benefit so much from hearing our stories, um, hearing stories from others. So please feel free to do that abundantly. And we wish you so much success and abundance in your
Mhm.
Reiki practice and life.
And we have the series has been bouncing back and forth between our two YouTube channels. So we'll put links to all of the videos in the series down below, and you can visit both of our channels to follow that conversation. And we look forward to being with you again as we continue this conversation around integrity and how we can be true to our way as people moving through this practice of Reiki. Thanks so much for
Thanks so
joining.
much.